Liz.
All right, and people are showing up right away. Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Piling in, nice. Well, I will wait to do my full spiel until everyone is in here, but we are so glad you're joining us this morning. This is great. This is the best attendance we've ever had. So thank you so much for coming. We're going to give it just a minute to let more people join. While we are waiting and having a few more people join, I do just want to go over for you, for those of you who are not super familiar with Zoom and virtual events, you should have down at the bottom of your screen a number of little icons, one of which is a button that says Q&A with some little speech balloons above it. When we get to the end of the presentation, there will be time for asking questions. And if you would like to submit a question, that is going to be the best way for you to do so. It'd be just to click that Q&A icon and type it into the Q&A box. That will allow us to see your question, and it will allow Zach to answer any questions you may have. It looks like the sign-ins have slowed down a bit. Looks like we've got most people here, so we may go ahead, give it just another minute. While we are waiting as well, our speaker today is Zach Yelton. He is the Director of Premium Services for Coastal Shores Landscape and Property Maintenance. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from Auburn University in horticulture with an emphasis on landscape design. This is his second time speaking with us, and he is an engaging speaker, so we really hope that you enjoy everything he has to tell you. And with that said, Zach, if you want to go ahead and take over here, I will kind of step back and let you get started.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. So glad that you were tuned in today and taking some time out of your schedules to talk with us about gardening. Fun stuff. I get energy from this stuff. I hope you do too. If you're here, I assume you are an avid gardener or aspire to be one, or just love the outdoors. So welcome. We welcome you. I hope you learned something today. I hope you can take something away from this. And as she said, I hope to have some time at the end to answer any questions you may have. But if you don't know, our company, Coastal Shores Landscape, is a landscape and property maintenance company here in the Lowcountry. We've been established since 2002. And we provide premium service to high-end residential and commercial properties throughout the Lowcountry here. So that's what we do. We exist for that reason, but also just to provide and cultivate a really good, safe company work environment for our employees. We educate them, we train them. Many of the things that we're talking about here today, we use to talk to our employees as well. We have a weekly training meeting that we go through with them. So, we hope to be able to empower them through those kind of things, to be a little more confident in the field, because landscaping is so much more than just mowing grass and doing that type of hard work. You gotta work with your mind too, and you gotta think. You need to know the landscape. So, anyway, that's us. If you have more questions, we'd love to talk to you more. We have a link coming to you shortly. If you don't see it, it'll be up very shortly, and it'll be an opportunity for you to enter your name, contact information, and that would sign you up to our monthly newsletter video that we hope is an informative and educating resource for all of our customers and those who want to sign up. But it'll also today, if you're signing up for that, it'll give you, it'll enter you for a chance for a drawing at the end. We'll have a prize drawing at the end. So follow that link and fill out the information. Liz, our marketing director here, she's on board as well right now with this meeting, and she will be collecting those, and we'll draw a winner at the end. All right, so without further ado, I hope everyone can see. I'm sharing my screen now. We've got a slideshow here today with some good information put on there. This is also recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to this at any time if you need to, and follow along and take notes. So let's get started. We're talking about perennials. So when we talk about perennials, we want, like, what is a perennial? A perennial simply is just defined as any plant that lives 2 or more years in the ground. So, you know, if you put everything into that category, you've got shrubs and trees that are perennials, right? There are evergreen perennials and there are deciduous perennials. Some of them lose their leaves in the winter and some of them keep their foliage year round. But we're specifically focusing on the flowering perennials, okay? So we have a couple of different categories that we break those down into: herbaceous perennials, which are more of a vegetative succulent stem, and it would grow from the ground upward in the spring and flower or produce fragrance or whatever its intent is. The other category would be a woody perennial, and a woody perennials are going to have more woody stems, usually more sturdy branching structure, sometimes more shrub-like, and it doesn't have to be tall. There are very short woody perennials as well. Oftentimes the woody perennials, their wood will stay above ground year round. You won't have to cut it all the way back to the ground. But those are the 2 categories we talk about. So a lot of the perennials we cover today will fall into one of those 2 categories. Let's see, so perennials, good long-term investment for the garden. The reason, one of the main reasons, is it provides some visual interest for you, flowering or even fragrant. There's medicinal values, there are culinary values to perennials, but they're also a great benefit to pollinators and birds and hummingbirds. So keeping these perennials in your garden, most of the flowers that the perennials will produce will be high in nectar and sugar content, and they're for that reason they're great for the pollinators and great for the butterflies and birds. Most perennials are easy to propagate, either by division, by cuttings, or even by harvesting the seeds. A quick little side note on that is to pay attention. Some of the propagated cultivars out there in the industry are trademarked, which means it is technically illegal to propagate those on your own. Essentially, they just want you to go and buy from them. And what they've done, they've discovered a really great thing, and they want you to pay for it, which is fair. But when you buy a perennial, you can often just do a quick Google search on it if you're concerned about that. So just wanted to put a plug in there for that. Perennials usually require less water once established. Like all plants, everything's going to need water right away. We'll talk about planting perennials in a minute, but we want to look at planting things in the fall or the spring. That's often the best time to plant almost anything, right? Cooler weather, cooler soil temperatures demand less from the plant to get started. If you're planting on the contrast in the middle of the summer, you're going to have to really water that thing to get it established. And in some cases, it's hard to impossible to get it established. But once perennials get established, less water is usually required to get them and keep them going. Many are drought tolerant, which is great. And as I said, native perennials provide a good habitat for the pollinators and birds. When we talk about design and layout, and 2 main designs come to mind, or 2 main purposes of perennial beds come to mind. You'll have an area in your yard that's a focal point, and you may create a perennial island bed, right, where this island is going to be viewed from all sides. Whether you're coming into the house or coming out of the house or walking around the yard, around the garden, this type of a bed is going to be viewed from all sides. A lot of times it's a raised area to provide good drainage, maybe separate it from the surrounding landscape. But when you think about designing it, you're going to want to design it accordingly. You're going to have something in the middle that's going to be taller and a bit of a focal point, and then you're going to have fillers and trailing type things around it, as it will be viewed from all sides. The other type we would talk about is a perennial border bed. And this is probably the most common because you're planting this up against some type of a screen, whether it's an evergreen shrub, a foundation of a home, a fence, a wall, something of that nature. Principles of design. So don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but I do, we keep this in mind when we go to design a perennial garden. If you're the kind of person that's going to the garden centers in the spring, a lot of garden centers right now are putting out perennials. As we come into the season, you're going to see more and more of those. So as you go through, just keep these principles in mind when you go through and select what you want in your garden. We design for simplicity. We want, you can achieve simplicity by having repeating colors and textures. Use 3 to 5 different plants as opposed to 12 or 15. A lot of this depends on the size of your garden, but think simplicity. Think about repeating themes and colors and textures throughout your garden. We talk about scale, and that would be relative to whatever its surrounding is. If you've got a tall 3-story home, you would not want to just plant a little small 2-foot tall bed right in front of this large foundation. You're going to probably have it supplemented with other trees and shrubs, and you'll have a selected area in the garden that's a little more appropriate to kind of step down the scale a little bit. Focal points. We talk about plants that focal points, those draw your eye right to that point. Small spaces usually only need 1 focal point. Larger spaces can have many. Balance kind of goes with simplicity a little bit, but balance, we do want to have some equality. If you've got a large perennial border bed, think about something at the beginning, the middle, and the end, or maybe even 2 structures, 2 specific perennials, maybe anchor plants that kind of define the space, and then you fill in the middle with other smaller plants that would be appropriate there. Or maybe going down a pathway. Think about balance on the left and right side of a pathway, that it draws the eye naturally down the pathway, as opposed to just being all heavy, and lopsided on one side of the pathway. I'll say one other comment about spatial awareness. As we go to lay out beds, think about, a lot of these perennials will live 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So don't plant and crowd these things. Crowding is going to cause issues when it comes to disease and insects. A lot of these perennials like to have good air movement in between. So when you go and place plants in a bed, plant them based on their 2 to 3 year maturity size. So a plant that you get in the store may be 12 inches wide, but in 3 years it's going to be 4 feet wide. So get a knowledge beforehand of how these plants grow. Most of the plants have a tag on the back, and it'll tell you what their expected size is. So keep that in mind too, and just be patient. You're not, we all want that instant effect, but these perennials can really grow in well if they have the proper space. Soil preparation and fertility. So this is important. We have a pretty wide range of soils here in the Lowcountry. And I see out in the Hardyville, Oakady area, we see a lot of heavy clay soil. And in other areas, we'll see sand. In some cases, there's heavy clay on top of a base layer of sand. Often that comes with, depending on how the community was developed, sometimes the developers will dig out of lagoon areas and use that material. It's not great topsoil, it's muck, and they'll put that on top of a sandier base. So that gives you 2 very different types of soil. But for this purpose, we really want to focus on this like 6 to 8 inch depth of soil. That's where most of our perennials are going to be growing their root systems. So in clay soils have very little drainage, very little air movement. Most perennials require good air movement. So you want to think about how to incorporate materials into the soil to increase that airflow and increase drainage and percolation. So composted pine bark, composted leaves, we'll talk about those in a minute. Incorporating that into the soil is going to help improve the drainage in a clay situation. incorporating means actually tilling that in. So you get a small tiller, or if you really want to use your back, put the pitchfork to use. But you'll need to turn those beds 6 to 8 inches down to really get that stuff in. In a sandy soil situation, nutrients and water, everything tends to leach straight down through the soil, and the water and nutrients are not available right there for very long for the plant. So you want to think about adding compost that would help the water holding capacity. Good drainage is critical. And if you need to get a bed, if the soil is just beyond hope, you need to think about a raised bed. Okay, so adding 8 to 12 inches of good organic soil, mounding it up and planting in that, and that can often mean a lot of loads of dirt, depending on how big of an area you want. But I would not advise even starting a perennial garden if you don't have a good base. So make sure you know what's beneath the soil level there, or otherwise you're just going to be pretty frustrated. Soil preparation, as we continue here, we think about fertility, and the best way to really know what's in your soil is with the soil test. The soil probe that you see here in the right side of your screen takes a little core slice straight down in the soil. It's pretty minimally invasive, and it just pulls that core out. You can send it off to the lab. This particular one here with the Clemson University system, we send off these kind of things pretty regular. We collect them in January, send it off, they will return it, and it'll tell us what's in the soil. Why do we do this? Well, you need to know pH. You need to know what the acidity or what the pH of the soil is. Okay. The soil samples are pretty good about giving you specific recommendations of what to do in certain situations. If it's too acidic, it's going to tell you to add lime to the soil to balance out that pH a little better. It's also, we talk about nutrient imbalance. So it's very important. Phosphorus and calcium are two elements that tend to build up in our soils. Well, why is that important? Well, a buildup of phosphorus in the soil can actually lock up nutrients and prevent the nutrients from being available to your plant. So you could put the best fertilizer in the world out there, but if you have a huge phosphorus imbalance, that phosphorus can actually hold the nutrients and prevent the roots of that plant from taking it up. So you may as well not be putting it out. So we need to know that, because just putting out 8-10-10 or 10-10-10 in your garden every year is, that's a balanced fertilizer, but you really need to know the levels, the pH levels, the nutrient levels in the soil prior to putting out and selecting your fertilizer even. So the fertilizer labels would have 3 numbers. So 8-10-10 would be, that middle number is the phosphorus level, and we talk about 10% phosphorus. All right, so if you're adding a fertilizer that has that phosphorus in there, and you're putting it in a soil that has a huge imbalance of phosphorus, you're just adding to the problem. So you need to be looking at a fertilizer like 15-0-15 that would have 0% phosphorus. You don't want to be adding more to it. Okay, so I say that it's important. The soil samples are pretty easy to do. You can go on Clemson's website and it'll direct you straight to how to collect it and where to send it. Planting. All right, so we all know planting, generally you want to get a good hole, at least twice the size of the root ball of the plant that you're planting. Loosen up that soil around there, incorporate organic top dressing mix or organic soils or compost in with the native soil, and plant it back in the hole. Make sure you tamp it down firmly. And the crown, it's important to know this, the crown of that plant should never be completely covered with soil. Okay, you can cover it with pine straw or light mulch, but you want to keep that crown right at the level of soil. So we talk about planting depth. Planting it too deep is often a recipe for death when it comes to plants. Fertilization. So once we get our soil results, our soil test results, and we know what kind of fertilizer we're using, you want to look at putting that fertilizer out in the early spring, right before the growth appears. And this is generally right after the danger of the last frost. Around here, we look at St. Patrick's Day is generally safe. We would rarely have a frost after St. Patrick's Day. And certainly it would be very rare to have a deep freeze after that. So don't want to put fertilizer out on plants promoting that growth before a freeze happens. So that's why we wait. So we talk about putting fertilizer out in the early spring. And as you can see here, the picture on the right would show where to put it out. So take that fertilizer, a couple of handfuls around each plant is all you need. And that's a granular form. And it's incorporated in. You don't need to mix it all the way down into the soil. Just don't have it sitting on top of the soil, especially not on top of your mulch. If you got some mulch, you need to pull that mulch back. Rake, this little garden rake here. We're just kind of combing through the soil and getting that fertilizer down into the top inch or so of soil. It protects it from being broken down by sunlight and being broken down too fast for other reasons. So this will get it down right to the root zone. Again, be careful. Don't want to put that fertilizer all the way at the crown of a plant. You want to make sure you get it out to the drip line of the plant. And that's where the roots are actively growing. Okay, composting. I put this in here because I think there's a lot of interest in this. You know, organic gardening. This is a big bonus doing organic gardening this way. So a lot of us don't have the space to do something like what you see here, but this is a very simple structure built out of 2x4s and chicken wire or hog wire. But it's a good way to recycle the leaves that you collect in the fall. So in this picture, the leaves have been collected on this property, put in these bins. And typically, so leaves are going to break down a lot faster when they are mulched up. So you would mulch them up with a lawnmower if possible, even a chipper of some kind if you have access to one of those. Lawnmower is probably the easiest way. But you collect those, dump them in a pile. If you've got space for something like this and you have someone caring for your property, ask them to deposit the leaf clippings into this particular area. And then simply, so you want to, the breakdown process is going to be sped up by adding a natural nitrogen substance to it. So something like cow manure, the black cow manure bags that you can buy from the garden centers, mix in a little bit of that in layers in the soil, and just keep turning it, cover it up, give it a week or two and keep turning it. And over the course of the winter, it's going to really break down. It's going to create heat and it's going to break that stuff down into a good compost that you can use. This is a great natural way of getting minerals and even nitrogen back into your soil. This is a true organic method of fertilizing. So this, again, it's not always practical if you don't have the space for it, but if you do and you're into it, this is a really great way. There's a lot of composting bins out there that folks have made, different contraptions that they say help speed it up. And all those are most of those are probably good. This is just a very simple and practical way. All right. Real quick, I'm gonna hurry through this so we can get to the more exciting part about our flowering plants, but it is worth mentioning about a few things about watering and general maintenance. All right, so overhead watering is generally not good. You want to avoid that, and that's because water sitting on the leaves of these plants can often cause fungus. So drip irrigation, soaker hose irrigation, we want to use that where possible. Most all of every one of your homes in Palmetto Bluff now is required to have drip irrigation in the plant beds and plants around the home. So it's generally pretty easy to tap into those existing systems and run a drip hose or soaker hose over to whatever perennial bed you're creating. So that's the beautiful thing about it. It's already in place in your properties. We do want to allow the soil to dry out, at least the top inch of soil to dry out between waterings on established plants. Different plants require different amounts of water. But generally you don't, too much water is going to cause a lot of problems in most every situation. So that's why we want good drainage. And it's why, you may not need watering every day. I get a question a lot, well, Zach, how much should I be watering? It depends. It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on sunlight, air movement, location on the property. Depends on if it's a raised bed, sandy soil, or, heavy clay soil. So that's a hard question to answer without being on site. But generally, if you can feel that top half inch or inch of soil is dry, then it's time to water again. Weed control using hand weeding, good mulching practices can help keep this down. The picture here shows some larger pine bark nuggets. Side note, I actually prefer smaller smaller nuggets myself, but in this case, this person was using the larger nuggets. A lot of people like the bold texture that it gives, and it does give good air movement. So heavy clay soils, when you have poor air movement and poor drainage, a larger pine bark nugget or pine straw would be preferable so that it can breathe in the soil a little bit better. It just allows a little more air to get down to that soil layer. But also, so this was taken in the winter, and we've got a woody perennial right here in this picture. You can actually see, this is probably in the early spring, you can actually see some of the new growth starting to come back from the base of the plant. And so that mulch around the crown of the plant during the winter months can help protect it from a frost. And you know, this plant has not been cut back yet, but this is a woody perennial, and you would want to cut these stems back to about 6 inches above the ground. Okay, and that's going to give plenty of buds for that new growth to emerge. But as I said, the mulch just in the fall months, that can help protect your plant all winter from a freeze. And fortunately, in this area, we don't have the soil freezing. It would be pretty rare to have the soil freezing in this area of the country. So we generally just want to protect our tender perennials from a hard frost, and you can do that by a light layer of pine straw or mulch. And then in the spring, you can just pull that back. All right, pruning, you know, it's pretty well known that removing old flowers is going to encourage more blooms. Sometimes, you know, cutting back the perennials in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the growing season, can help promote more blooms. So an added benefit there is if you've got a perennial selected that's a really good cut flower arrangement, you can snip off those flowers, put them in a vase, use them as decor around your house or patio. And you've also benefited the plant because this plant is going to produce flowers, more flowers on the new growth. It also just helps better branching structure, and it helps the plant not get so leggy. So if you're cutting that plant back after its first production of flowers, that can often help it stay more bushy and just put on a lot more blooms. Staking the plant sometimes is helpful depending on what kind of plant you have. You know, the Joe Pye weed, milkweed, those things come to mind. They have long, straight, tall stems with a flower head at the top. And oftentimes that can get really heavy, especially late in the season. So it's important to have a staking system. And that can be something as simple as the little green wire stakes that you can find in the garden centers, or a little, you know, 1x1 treated piece of wood that you can stake in the ground and tie some string to. Dividing perennials. Okay, so this is I've got a lot of information on these next couple of slides, and I hope it's something that you can use as a resource. There's a lot of information on the web about this as well, but generally a couple of things you want to think about. You know, why do we need to divide perennials? Well, a lot of perennials, like the grass, the ornamental grass in the top right corner here, this picture is showing a miscanthus grass. This is Adagio, the dwarf miscanthus. Very pretty flower head late in the fall, in early fall season. But this is a plant that grows out, and the center is oftentimes going to die. You'll see dead in the center, and you'll see a lot of growth around the exterior. This plant needs dividing in order to help it go on. If you don't do anything, it's likely that in a couple of years it will be completely dead and much weaker. So we'll talk a little bit more about dividing in a second, but you know, generally plants need dividing every 3 to 4 years. And that, if you think about it, that's a lot. That plant's giving you a lot in 3 or 4 years. So give back to it, make it do a little bit better, go and divide it and make it spread about your garden. You know, daylilies fall into this category, ornamental grasses, we'll go into some of those. But, you know, when we talk about a process, we would, so in the bottom picture is a picture of a daylily. This is done in the early spring, and this plant has a lot of foliage on it right now. It needs to be cut back to about 6 inches when you go to divide it. So he's got a pitchfork here, and he's about 6 inches away from that plant. He's going to push that thing down and pop the plant up out of the ground. So you can use a spade, shovel, or a garden fork for this, but you want to pop the whole plant up and out of the ground. And And then, depending on what kind of root system it has, it's going to have different methods of dividing. All right, so the first type we have is clumping type root systems. This category would be for daylilies, liriope, hosta, ornamental grasses. Okay, and as you can see, the bottom right-hand picture is a clump of grass that we've dug up, and we've taken. This person's actually taken a sawzall to it. Believe it or not, you can take a hatchet, a sharp knife, a spade, shovel. This is a thick, fibrous clump of roots, right? So it takes a lot to really get through that sometimes. The middle picture here is of a daylily, and there's a spade shovel there, slicing right through there. The next picture is kind of where you want to be before you go and transplant these things into the ground. That you can see the cluster of roots, the clump of roots has been divided up, and the gentleman there is holding a cluster there that's been cut back to about 6 inches, and he's separating all those fibrous roots from one another. And each one of these separations is going to become a new plant. So he's taken one plant and he's going to make probably 6 or 7 different ones out of it, which is the beautiful thing about something like a daylily. All right. You want to make sure you save at least one shoot or bud per plant and a good healthy portion of roots there. The picture on the right shows a grass plant, and this is a drawing I found on the web. Somebody did a nice job of depicting this. The center of it has died out. The exterior portion is the alive, the living portion of the edge. So you want to dig that whole thing up and kind of slice it up, as you see over here in the bottom left picture. All right, plants with a spreading root system. We think about all the asters plants in the Asteraceae family. This would include all of your daisies, your black-eyed Susans, your echinacea, bee balm, lamb's ear, salvias. Okay, again, pop the plant out of the ground. Once it's out of the ground, you'll kind of cut through this. The gentleman here in this picture is using a sharp knife to cut through and divide these things. He's getting plenty of roots with each one. And then he's going to go plant these as you would any new plant. You just want to avoid letting these things dry out, as you'll have the roots dry out very quickly. So do this in the early morning when it's not quite as hot. The last group I'll talk about is plants with a rhizome root system. These are plants in the iris family, and there's several others, but I particularly highlighted the iris because that's one we use a lot around here. Rhizomes, of course, are swollen stems that grow horizontally through the soil. So the picture in the top right over here, you see a group of irises. Those little swollen nodes down there are a stem that's growing under the soil, and they keep spreading and dividing that way. And often it's just time that they get very thick very quickly. So this is a plant, it's a little more difficult and can be very tough to get through and dig up. But when you do, the drawing up here in the left shows the red lines on there show where you'd want to make the cuts and where you could divide each one to become a new plant. The bottom left picture shows the result of that after you've made all those cuts, and each one of these can be taken and grown as a new plant. Plant them, 24 to 30 inches apart in the soil, and you've got a whole new section of your garden. Or give them to a friend or a neighbor who doesn't know. And now you taught them something new. All right. Okay, plant selection. We'll get over to some more exciting material. We talk about actual flowers and some of the choices that are good for this area. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the design. When you go through the garden centers, or when you're doing your research ahead of the growing season and you're going to select your plants, you want to make sure you select the right plant for the site conditions. Deer and rabbits, we all know that they are a huge nuisance here in our area, as they are in many parts of the country. But we work hard to prevent the damage that they cause in our gardens. But boy, it's really hard. They'll eat. I've seen them eat just about anything, even plants that we say are deer resistant. If you've got an ideal situation, you've got some type of a fenced in garden courtyard area where the deer are naturally going to stay away from, and that would definitely broaden what you can use. But if you do have an area where the deer can access easily, you want to make sure you select the plants that can combat that naturally. And most all of the ones I've got here today in the upcoming slides are deer resistant, and we've had good success growing them. So you want to think about, morning sun versus afternoon sun. When a plant says full sun, the grower of that plant might have said full sun because it needs a lot of sunlight to perform, and that's true. But that's a general spec for this plant, and they are assuming that it's going to be grown in a large variety of areas across the country, large variety of plants, that is. Down in the deep south where we are, we have long, hot summers. The humidity and the intense summer heat can really take a toll on these things. So most of our perennials are going to desire afternoon sun. So if at all possible, design your perennial bed or select the location in your yard where you can get some afternoon sun. Sometimes this is on the north and east side of the house. Sometimes it's where a tree is located. Again, the north and east side of any object is generally going to have a little more shade or protection from the afternoon sun. So think about that when you're going to select your sites. Exposure to wind. Okay, we have a lot of homes, waterfront homes that are, especially ones that are on the sound or the river. You're going to get a lot of persistent winds coming in. So you need to think about that and think about the height and sturdiness of your plants when you go and design these things. If it's going to be blown over, oftentimes the garden's not going to succeed. And potential for freeze damage. You can get away with planting some real succulent and even tropical type plants that'll last year round when you have them planted in a protected courtyard or a little bay, a little area, a nook, something like that up next to your house where it's getting some residual heat. I've seen a lot of plants this year. Trying to think, for instance, the shell ginger, the variegated shell ginger, we've probably all seen that. If it's in the wide open area, it probably got burned pretty good this year, versus if it's protected up by the base of a house or next to a structure, or even underneath some heavy shade, it probably was protected and it did not need to be cut back. So think about that when you go to select your plants. All right. This next section, I've got several slides in here that we'll be talking about specific plants and some varieties and cultivars that you can use in your garden. These are favorites of mine. It's by no means a comprehensive list of all the plants that'll do well here in the Lowcountry, but I have successfully grown these either in my garden at home or my client's garden, and I've seen consistent results over a 3 to 4 year span, which is what you need from a perennial. So well-drained soil. For the first one we'll talk about here is a juga. This is a ground cover, very nice plant that you can use in rock gardens or along pathways. This is a plant that does have a bloom on it. As you can see in the picture there, most of the blooms are a purple to dark color. It spreads it has these little rosettes and it spreads outward very rapidly. So avoid planting this one next to the border of a lawn unless you really want to stay after it, because it is going to reseed and it's going to creep out into the lawn. I've seen this one start to grow in the grass that it's planted. So oftentimes our lawn maintenance companies don't appreciate to have this one right next to a lawn, but it is a very good ground cover throughout the garden. The deer will eat this one, so be careful if you're using this one in an area that's exposed to the deer. But besides that, it's a really, really great ground cover. Some varieties there: Burgundy Glow, Atropurpurea, Chocolate Chip. The particular one in this photo is Chocolate Chip. I just love that jade green foliage. That's the older foliage, and the new stuff is kind of that deep purple, real bright purple color. So it's a lovely plant. Really, really like this one. Bee balm. Okay, very interesting plant. And I tell you, I love this. I wish I had the acreage to grow this. I would just have a mass field of it. It's great for a woodland border. It does like the full sun, but again, that afternoon sun, if you can protect it from that, that would be great. This one will thrive in moist, wet soil. Okay, again, this is in the mint family. The Lamiaceae family. So when we talk about plants in this family, most of them can survive in wet soils. And some of them can even be a little invasive. If you think about, your spearmint plant, that one, as you know, can grow and hop and run and really take over a garden. This is similar, but if you're willing to put in the work, it can be very rewarding. So bee balm, okay, again, medicinal uses for this. It's been around forever. The old Oswego Indians up in the New York area would use this for tea. It's also called red bergamot. Red bergamot, of course, bergamot, when we think about Earl Grey tea, okay, that's bergamot is where the Earl Grey flavor comes from, if you will. And the English settlers, when they came over here to America and colonized, they would use this as a substitute. So if they ran low on tea from England, they would use this plant as a substitute, boiling the leaves down. Very fragrant, beautiful fragrance, beautiful flower. It's not going to be flowering year round, of course, but it has interest on a lot of levels. Also, used to treat bee stings, so hence the name bee balm. Horse mint. Okay, another one in the mint family. This one is a little more drought tolerant and can tolerate some drier soils. It actually prefers drier, sandy soils. All of these are butterfly attractors, attract bees and birds. Again, 1 to 3 feet tall on this one. Medicinal uses, used to treat for backaches and inflammation. I've got a note here. It's also native to prairies, pastures, and meadows. A lot of these are that way. And so when you think about how to use them in your garden, think about that's where they want to grow and how they want to grow. They're going to want to spread. But again, these would be good for perennials for an area that you want to try to colonize and grow out a little bit. The obedient plant. Okay, so this is one that this is actually growing in my garden at home. And I don't know that this one gets enough credit. I've had this one in my garden for 5 years now, and it just comes back bigger and better every year. In fact, I have to work to keep it contained. I have to pluck out the new babies that are coming up because they're spreading into other areas of my perennial garden that I don't want. This is a lavender blooming variety. There's a pure white blooming variety too. It does like full sun. It'll take a little bit of afternoon shade, but it really likes that full sun. It loves the wet soil. Well, I say moist soil. It needs good drainage. It does not want to be sitting in sop, but it will take, like a lot of other plants in the mint family, again, the Lamiaceae family, it can take a little bit more water than others. This one's actually native to lower prairie lands and wet soil areas. It's a great cut flower. We've used it. My wife uses it regularly in the home, cutting it, when it's growing in the summer and blooming to fill out a little vase for the countertop or something. But very nice soil. It kind of reminds you of a snapdragon, maybe the bloom, a smaller version of the digitalis, the foxglove. Okay. Great plant though. Don't think it gets enough attention. I really don't. And I actually bought mine at Home Depot about 5 years ago. So there you go. It's a shameless plug for Home Depot. Salvia. Okay, salvia. This is probably my favorite perennial to use. I really, really love the salvias. Thousands of different species of this plant. They're very adaptable. Of course, there are annual salvias and there are perennial salvias. The ones I've mentioned here in the coming slides are going to be perennial salvias. I've done several of these gardens throughout the Lowcountry over the years, and they've had really good success. I grow this one a lot at my home. I've got 3 or 4 different varieties at home that I just love to grow. There's the different varieties I'll cover are listed here. And there are a lot of different spin-offs of this. There are some cross breeds of this where, for instance, the Salvia farinaceae, we'll take a look in a minute. That one was crossbred with a different salvia that's not even native to this area, but it produced a really great, sturdy, compact form of an old faithful salvia that has been used for a long time. So we'll look at this one. The one you see here in the picture on the right, This is in my garden at home. This was taken last summer, and the blue blooming variety is a really nice one called Mystic Spires, and that is a cross of Salvia farinaceae, which on the previous slide you'll see Salvia farinaceae, the mealy cup sage. That's the common name that you'll often see with it. But this one has just been a juggernaut in the garden. It's growing right now at about 3.5 feet in this picture, just always full and bushy, huge long flower spikes. These flower spikes are probably 12 to 15 inches long, some of them. They work great for cut gardens or for cut flower gardens. You can see in the picture in the left, I've got a mixture of different salvias. So if you look, my son there standing there admiring his work, but the light pink, the dark blue, and the dark pink flower are all 3 different salvias that I have in my garden. We'll cover those here in a minute. The light pink one that you saw on the ground, let me back up. Right here in front of my son is that light pink blooming one. Okay, that's this one here. That's Salvia coccinea. That's the Texas sage. This is the light pink one is called Summer Jewel. I've got that written down there in the notes. The more traditional one that you'll see growing wild in and throughout Texas is just the old red Texas sage, which you see here in the picture on the left. Pretty adaptable to a wide variety of soils. It does like to be deadhead to keep the flowers coming, but I tell you, this one reseeds so rapidly. So if you're going to do it, you got to commit to it. It will reseed and run. I've had this one run out in my yard and reseed out in the yard. I've had to hand pull those out by hand, but boy, it puts on a really, really nice display. Plant them where you can plant them in a mass. Okay, the mealy cup sage, Salvia farinaceae, we just covered that one. This is the picture down in the bottom here is the plant growing in a smaller form. Mystic Spires, though, is the one that I showed you a few slides ago, growing in my garden. That one is going to be a little bit taller. It is compact. It's compact in the sense that it stays real bushy and green, but it will grow up to 3 feet tall. Again, great plant to put in a mass border. I've got a really small garden, as you can see here, and it's not a big space. It's only about 15 feet by 8 feet, so it's small, but I wish I could triple it and really pack these in. All of the salvias are great for hummingbirds and butterflies and bees. I'll say I got this one in here because this one's interesting. The Mexican bush sage, Salvia leucantha. Okay, it's a late bloomer, and when you think about plants designing a garden with different bloom times throughout the year, this is one to have in there, and this one will flower later in the summer. You won't see any flowers on it until, at least around here, I see them come on around August or September, and it'll flower all the way to frost. It's really, really nice. Don't be afraid to clip it back a couple of times, at least once in the early part of the summer, to make it a little bit more bushy and really make the blooms show like you see here. Very tough plant. I've seen this one planted on a commercial property. I planted it probably close to 10 or 11 years ago, and it's still going strong year after year after year. It's just, and this property is a very low maintenance type property, so it just doesn't receive a lot of intense garden care. And this one is coming back year after year. In fact, now it's so established. I mean, it's drought tolerant. It gets minimal irrigation, and it's just coming back all the time. So it's a really good one. This is the last one of the salvias. So the anise scented sage or hummingbird sage. This one will take a little bit more of a wet soil. It likes to have moisture in the late summer, especially when it gets really hot. It needs to be watered pretty regularly in extreme heat, but it is a very forgiving plant and will come back year after year. The cobalt blue flowers that you see here are very indicative of this one. It's kind of a unique color in the bloom because it's got some black in there as well. This was hence the black and blue sage or black and blue salvia. If you've heard of that one, that's the Salvia guaranitica here that you see. I'm going to back up a couple of slides and show you the picture here on the right. The pink blooming variety is a a pink variety of the Salvia guaranitica. Okay, it's a close cousin to the black and blue sage. This just has a pink expression, and it's very nice, very nice. It'll get tall. That particular plant, I've seen it get 4.5, 5 feet tall in the garden. As you can see here in this picture on the left, this plant is pushing 3 or 4 feet as well. And they've got it planted on a border, so it's really spilling out over the pathway edge. All right, agastache is another one in the mint family. Again, some very pretty expressions of this plant. I didn't have time to list all the varieties that you can find, but generally this is a plant that likes drier, sandier soils. It's native to upland prairies. I can think of a lot of locations in Palmetto Bluff where this one would work well. Needs to have afternoon shade though. It does not like that afternoon sun. Spreads by rhizome, so it will naturalize in an area. And again, you see kind of a pinkish orange variety, which is really interesting here. Those are available, and you're seeing this one come out a little bit more now in the garden centers. Again, another great one for butterflies, bees, high in nectar content. And this is just a good all-around plant. You can see the bottom picture here on the left. Behind this purple blooming plant, this taller one back here is the Joe Pye weed. So gives you an idea of how to use it, right? You got the Joe Pye weed, which can get to 6 feet tall, but has these kind of mauve-colored blooms on the end of those long stems. Front plant that with something like one of the salvias or the agastache. Just a really great one. Do need to watch out for aphids and powdery mildew. This one likes to have a lot of air movement. It might be a plant that you just see kind of play out in the middle of the summer and make it come back in the fall. So don't be afraid after it's had this nice spring bloom, cut it all the way back to about 10 or 12 inches, and it'll grow back by the fall and put on another bloom for you. Artemisia. Okay, so this is one native to, it won't tolerate wet soil. So it's native to kind of a rock garden. You see this one a lot in the Mediterranean regions of the world. And it's a really nice one because it's got this feathery grayish blue foliage, and it's a spreader. It's a good ground cover. It's a very woody, shrubby plant. And but it stays very low to the ground, as you can see here. Same genus as in the tarragon family. So you think about that as a culinary herb. You'll get a real similar scent when you pinch these leaves off and smell it. Very nice. I love this one paired with a podocarpus hedge or a boxwood hedge. It's just a really nice filler. It won't tolerate wet soil. It does need good drainage, but I planted this one years ago in a garden on Hilton Head, and it did really well for 3 or 4 years, and then we had to replace it. But it's a nice one. Green and gold. Okay, so we're kind of moving over to the aster family, the Asteraceae family. All of these are daisy-like flowers. This is a really good one, a great choice for along woodland borders. It has a real delicate yellow flower, but it's a pretty sturdy little plant. It likes to colonize, it likes to spread, but if you've got a site, a well-drained site next to a wooded border, get some of this established, and it'll be a very rewarding look for you year after year. Black-eyed Susan. Okay, so again, the Asteraceae family. This is a good one. If you've gardened for a while, you've probably used this one in some form or fashion. This one, I've got this one in my garden. It's one of my favorites, my wife's favorite flower. So it does like the hot, sunny locations. But again, a little afternoon shade is going to be good here in the deep south. I've seen this one do really well up in the upland regions of South Carolina and North Carolina. It loves those summers up there, but it can tolerate it down here. I will say this, I've got this one in my garden, and every single year without fail, it's gotten aphids and a little bit of the powdery mildew. So you got to stay on it in the late season. If you can keep those things off of it, it will bloom for you all the way to frost. It's a very nice plant. Reseeds readily. Purple coneflower. A lot of us know this one for its, medicinal and culinary value. Obviously used in teas. It's great for the immune system. These tall purple flowers are the real prominent center in there. The interesting little fact here, echinacea comes from the Latin word echinos, which is hedgehog. So they thought this one in the center, the little center bud there, looked like a hedgehog. So that's where it got its Latin name from. If you look into these Latin names, there's really great stories about all of them. If you're a geek like me and love that kind of stuff, it would be fun to do a little research on it. This is another one though, just like the black-eyed Susan, you can expect to have powdery mildew and aphids and slugs on this one. I'm gonna say a little less about the next few because I really want to get to your questions. Again, guys, I'm suggesting these are all plants that I've seen work well in the low country, and generally the deer have stayed away from where I've used them in most cases. Tickseed coreopsis, another one in the aster family, very, very similar flower to that of the black-eyed Susan. So, if you've got a lot of that in your garden, you may consider using something different. But this one is a very profuse bloomer, packed and loaded with blooms. Deadheading will definitely help keep that coming. There are some varieties here that are more hardy than others, and so if you have a less hardy variety in a colder environment, you might see this one behave more like an annual, meaning you'd have to replant it every year. The butterfly, the milkweed, I've got this one, Asclepias tuberosa, and then Asclepias incarnata. This is the swamp milkweed. So both of these are really, really great, very important for the monarch butterfly. This is a great host plant for the monarch butterfly. This is an extremely easy plant to grow and will definitely reseed itself. Has these nice flowers in the summer. I'm toggling back and forth between both of these here. These have a high deer resistance. At the end of their summer, after they bloom, they will have a seed pod, and that thing opens up, and just watch out because all the seeds go everywhere. This is a plant you want to plant when you've got room for it to grow, or make sure you control that by just pinching off the seed pods before they open up. But this one will thrive in, this particular one, the swamp milkweed, will thrive in muck, wet soil. So if that's your case, especially in the Oakady, Hardyville area where we have some of that, this is a pretty good one here for a lot of reasons. Wild blue indigo. So I'll say this about that. So I was over on Defusky last summer, spending some time with my family over there. And if you've been to Defusky, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a place like no other. If you haven't, it's definitely worth the trip to go. But spend some time over there. Go see my friend Leanne Coulter. She's at the Merrifield School, the old schoolhouse there that was in service back in the early part of the 1900s. On Defusky there. But Leanne and her business partner have done a really great job over there. They've got wild blue indigo growing all around that area. You can see this plant growing natively on the island. They've established it there, and they're using it for, go figure, blue dye, right? So making blue jeans, all kinds of tie-dye stuff. But I mean, anything that you can imagine that would be blue, I mean, they're using this. So when you pinch open the leaves and pinch open the stems, when that hits the air, it creates this real blue stain. And that's the beautiful thing about this plant. So she's got a whole process there that she's perfected, but an interesting one here nonetheless. Daylilies, we're all familiar with the daylilies. I will say this, I've had a little mixed results with daylilies here in the low country. Clemson has a really great resource page. Check their fact sheet. I've got the link right here. Or if you just type in daylilies Clemson, it'll come up to their fact sheet. They've got a really great section on it, and would probably give you some options as to what would be a good choice here in the low country. These are a deer favorite. So if you got an area where it's protected from the deer, go ahead and use it. But otherwise, I would avoid it. It is a very nice one. Daylilies, obviously the blooms come open and they stay on for a day and close up and fall off, and then the next one comes on. But they are just a profuse bloomer. Joe Pye weed, I really want to respect y'all's time, so I'm gonna go through these. This is a good one in the back border of a garden. You can see here in the bottom left picture, this is a plant that wants to grow 3 to 6 feet tall, 2 feet wide. I had a good friend years ago that was involved in Kalawasi, Iowans Community Club, and he planted this one at their butterfly garden, and it was a perennial monster. It was just a really, really good plant. Can get powdery mildew in shady sites, so it does need a full sun site to grow. A few other perennials here to consider with deer tolerance. I didn't cover anything really in the iris family, but the African iris and the Iris siberica are both really good ones. Iris siberica particularly will thrive in wet soils, so that's a good one. Gara, I didn't talk about Gara, but that's a real good one I've got in my garden. And it's a real airy, kind of a dainty plant, but if you plant 6 or 8 of these in a 10 by 10 area, it'll really cover the whole area with just this huge kind of a wispy blanket of white and pink blooms. And it is year after year after year doing well. Mexican heather, ornamental grasses, plumbago, those are all other ones that we've used here. Ornamental grasses, obviously there is just a heap of information on that online. Check Clemson's website again. They have some great sources there if you're unfamiliar with those. And then I've got these 2 seed sources here. So a lot of people ask, well, where can I find the seeds? Where can I find the plants? And these are 2 good sources. Now, a little more locally one here is the bottom one, carolinawild.com. Go check out their website. They are up in Anderson, South Carolina, so up in the upstate. But they've got a really nice operation from what I can tell. And I've spoken to them. They have a lot of the plant materials we covered today. They have a good stock of. So if you can't find them in the garden centers here, or you don't know where you can get that, then going upstate would be good. If you happen to be traveling up that way, stop in there, or they do mail orders too. So if you're comfortable growing something from seed, they can ship that to you. Same thing with this group out of Texas, seedsource.com. Their website is really, really good. Do a lot of the plants that we talked about today are native out of Texas, and Texas is just a monster state for producing that kind of stuff. So there's a couple of sources for you outside of course, our local garden centers. So that wraps up the material, and I wanted to give some time to help answer any of your questions. Let's see.
All right. And Zach, are you able to see the Q&A questions over on your side? If not, I am happy to read them to you.
I'm working on that. I see a tab for it, but when I click on it, I can't. Oh, you know what? Maybe stop sharing my screen. Let me see. Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think I got it now.
Okay, great.
All right, I'll try to get these in the order that they were received. Mary Stallman. Okay, more of a comment. Thank you, Mary. Okay, Deborah Kimball, interested in the history of indigo. Is it hard to grow, and where can I find it? That's a great question, Deborah. So over on Defusky, Leanne might be able to help us with that. She's grown them there, and I mean, they reseed regularly. So she propagates her own over there. Again, when you see where this is growing, if you could be there, it's literally on the side of a dirt road, and it's a sandy ditch bank on the edge of this wood line. And it's a hot, sunny wood line. You look at it in the summer when you're riding your bike there, and it's just like, how could anything grow here? But it's wild blue indigo is growing year after year after year. So she's propagated it there. She's not getting these things and replanting them. I mean, I think she's taking what she has and just propagating it there. If you go over and talk with her, she'd probably give you a few seeds or cuttings. Check with the sources though that I listed there online. You might be able to find it there. It's not one you're going to see just regularly in the garden centers though. But if I can find anything out, I'm gonna write that down and find out from Leanne if there's a source for that.
I was going to say too, I also know Leanne, and so Debbie, I'm happy to connect you with her as well if you would like me to do that. I will get with you a little bit later on that.
Cool. And oh, Deborah, okay, yeah, she said I just answered this. All right. Okay, Terry Molnar, define deadhead. Okay, great question, Terry. So deadheading, when we talk about deadheading, we talk about the plant producing a flower. You'll see the flower sometimes kind of at the end of its bloom time or bloom cycle. It's pretty easy to see on something like a daylily because the lily will literally just close up and shrink and fall off eventually. You're going to just clip that off at the base of the stalk when that whole stalk is done. Salvias and the agastache, those kind of things. Okay, deadheading those. You'll see the flower. Okay, on the flower, it has a tall flower spike, right? And the flowers are just real vibrant all up and down the spike, more vibrant at the very top than at the bottom. That's because at the very top, that's where the new flower buds are coming on. So as you start to see that thing kind of stretch out and the blooms that were nice and vibrant at the bottom start to kind of play out, that's time to deadhead. Okay. And so when you deadhead, you can literally take your fingers and just pinch or break those off. They snap off pretty easy. If you got a pair of, heavy duty kitchen shears or kitchen scissors, that would be appropriate too on a lot of those real fleshy plants. But just, snipping off the buds or snipping off the blooms. And what that does is it forces the next bud down on the plant to grow and take over. All right. Mr. Peronin. Hello, sir. What ferns flourish? My research suggests hay-scented fern does well in drier soils. That is true. That is true. And, I've seen, I think about ferns, growing wild, the autumn fern, the Christmas fern, the holly fern are all plants that I see growing really well. I've done all those really well. Years ago, did them on Hilton Head. And I've got holly ferns that are 3.5, 4 feet tall, just monster. If you've been down to the Heritage Golf Tournament, walking around down there near the 16th, 17th, 18th green, there's just massive clusters of holly fern that have grown. Holly fern is one of those plants, though, that when it's planted in full sun, it just doesn't seem to look good, right? It's got the burned foliage and the tips of it are kind of yellow and burned and brown. Just doesn't look very attractive. So they can be tough to establish, but you definitely want to protect. Most ferns you're going to want to protect from the afternoon sun. If you've got a shadier site or an area where you've got a lot of tree cover, you've got a good spot to grow fern. The autumn fern is one of my absolute favorite, though. It's got such nice colors and nice textures in the foliage and the growth. All right, Terry Molnar, do pine needles harm plants? Should they be removed from around plants? So pine needles, pine needles are used readily here. They're readily available because of all the pine trees across the South. It's also a little cheaper than mulch comparatively when you talk about covering square footage. So pine needles are good, especially on a property with a lot of pine trees already. If you've got a lot of pine trees, those needles are going to be dropping year round. If you've got mulch beds in those areas, they're going to be littered with pine straw, and it's often hard to separate that and keep it clean. So I just generally lean into that. And if a property's got a lot of pine trees in those areas, at least, I'll try to use pine straw. Your specific question, though, about covering plants is, pine straw can breathe a little better than some of the real thick mulches. Generally, though, you don't want to pile any mulch or pine straw up around the crown of a plant. That's where it can harm the plant. I'm not sure from a standpoint of soil nutrition, pine needles actually provide acidity. They're an acidifying agent for the soil. We've got naturally acid soil here in this area, so an area where a lot of pine needles are there and decomposing year after year after year. It contributes to that soil acidity. So you pull a soil test from an area with a lot of pines, you're going to find something probably in the 5 to 6 pH range. And no, that's not harming plants. Most of the plants here do really well between a pH of 5.5 to 6.5. That's where they're most happy. Same thing with the grasses. It's just around the plant. You want to be careful about pine straw being mounded up around the crown of a plant. That's where you'll get into trouble, especially on trees. Hate to see that. You want to see that basal flare, right? The point at which the trunk goes in the ground and starts to flare out. You want to be able to see that and have that pine straw away from there. Will you provide us the links you showed for the resources? And yes, that's on the slide there. I'll try to get Liz to post those here while I'm talking. I rinse off the pine dust off our magnolias. Is that okay? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This time of year, you're starting to see that yellow pollen from the pines, and even the wax myrtles are coming on strong now. So you'll see all that on the surface of your leaf, and that's absolutely fine. Just washing off with a garden hose. You're not hurting that at all. This person asked a question about hibiscus. So hibiscus here in this area is a lovely plant. I mean, it's just such a nice tropical plant. If we've ever spent any time Orlando, Florida, or south, and even down into the Caribbean, of course, you're seeing this one grow wild, right? It's just an awesome bloom, big, huge bloom. Most of our hibiscus here that we see are annuals. There is a perennial hibiscus, and I've seen that grown with some success. Most of them seem to be the red blooming variety, and they can get 4 to 6 feet tall. I've seen really, really nice ones. You got to protect it though, and I would be a little concerned this winter about how much damage it took on. This is one that if you have the ability, have it in a container and move that container near the house or under a porch or patio in the winter months. But other than that, yeah, it'll do well. I remember seeing this hibiscus in front of a commercial building on Hilton Head years ago. I took care of the property, and for 4 or 5 years in a row, it would get knocked back every winter. We'd cut it back to the new wood in the spring, and it would come out and bloom beautifully the next year. Our next question, our plumbago was destroyed by house washing. I'd love to plant it again. Any suggestions? Yeah, plumbago is a good plant. That's one that the deer seem to avoid. We've got it planted at several of our houses in Palmetto Bluff and areas where the deer are highly present, highly active, and they move on past that plant. The plumbago, oftentimes the bleach or whatever from the washing of the house can affect it. If that is the case, if it was burned by bleach, you may want to do a little scratch test on the bark. Get down there with a pocket knife and scratch the bark. If you got green in that bark, chances are it will grow back. Cut it about 6 inches up from the soil, and it'll grow back from the base of the soil and form the new plant. If you're sure it's just brittle and the wood is dead all the way to the ground, it's time to replant it. I would start with a 3-gallon plant, not a 1-gallon plant. I've seen better success with the larger root stocks from the start establishing here in this area. How do you know where the crown begins? Is it just the bottom of the plant? Good question, Terry. So the crown of the plant is going to be the point at which it enters the soil. So right where it would come out of the soil is going to be the crown. Now, if you're getting a plant that's in a container, look at the point where the stem goes down, and the crown is going to be the part where you start to get the basal flare of the plant. Now that's going to be applicable for more of your woody stems, right? Like your salvias are going to have a woody stem base like that. That's the crown of the plant. On things like ferns and daylilies, where it's just a vegetative, point of growth up and coming out of the soil, it's just going to be right at the soil line there. So let's see. Next question, Mary Sweat. How do you recommend treating powdery mildew? Yeah, great question. And powdery mildew is a commonly known widespread fungus. That's one, most of the garden centers, Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Lowe's, you're going to find probably 3 or 4 different broad spectrum fungicides. And broad spectrum just means it's kind of like, an antibiotic. It's going to treat several different strands of a particular bacteria. Same thing with powdery mildew. Those broad spectrum fungicides are what you need to look for, and they will treat that. Most of them will have powdery mildew on there. Let's see, Mr. Peronin, what nursery stores rather than the big box stores have a good selection of annuals and perennials in Savannah? All right, well, Olshig Nursery is hands down the best ones. They are in Savannah. Olshigs is good. It's unfortunately they're only selling to commercial growers. You got to have a business license to purchase from there. You know, most of the garden centers around here, Taylor's, and then there's the one on 46. Sorry, it's escaping my mind right now, but they have direct accounts with people like Olshigs, and so if they don't have it in stock, you know, they're getting regular shipments every week. And if you find something you want, especially the salvias, Ward, go check the salvias out at Olshigs. They have a lot of them there, so you can go to one of those two places and they'll be able to order. Chris Richardson, guys, if you'll excuse me for one moment, I will be right back. Give me 30 seconds.
So he will be right back while we are waiting. Thank you so much for all of your questions. This is excellent. Really happy for the engagement. If you think of any questions later on, please feel free to send them to me and I can make sure Zach gets them. Or we have over in the chat box, if you're able to access that, there is a Google form that Liz has that you can fill out, and you can also reach out to them that way, or they can reach out to you. So that is there. Any links that were provided today, I will go ahead and email out to everyone afterward. We do have everybody's email addresses for the most part all set and in a list of attendance so that we can get that information out to you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. Got time for a couple more questions? Chris Richardson, I have a few areas at the front of my house that receive no sun or very little sun. Will anything grow there? I currently have ferns in this area. Okay, so yes, there's a few plants that love the filtered sunlight or even full shade. And I don't know if you're looking to achieve screening on the foundation, or if you're looking to just fill out some space in a bed. You know, some good screening plants that would help screen the foundation. You think about Sasanqua camellias. Camellias, those are slower growing, and there are larger varieties that are larger options that you can get right away, but you'll pay for them. Just keep that in mind. But they thrive in the, you know, part sun to shade. Okay, the other plants that you can consider a little bit more tropical, but the split leaf philodendron is really nice. And if it's protected, you can get it to go year round without burning out in the frost. If it does get hit by the frost, you can cut it back and it'll regrow. I'll tell you another one that's been it needs to be used more, and I think you're starting to see it more, especially in some of the newer build homes throughout Palmetto Bluff. The architects are using this one, and it's the anise, the Florida anise. It's a red anise, and I believe it's scarlet. The name is slipping. The particular cultivar name is slipping my mind, but it's a type of red anise, and boy, it's a nice plant. Look it up. Scarlet something, red anise. If you type that in on Google, just do a Google search, it'll pop right up. That's a really nice one. Does really well in the full shade. You know, if you're looking for some accent type plants, something besides the ferns there you mentioned, you can do variegated shell ginger. That one would also do very well in the shade. Thoughts on controlling boxwood blight? Jack Slovic. Jack, that's a tough one. I love boxwood. I'm born and raised here in Georgia, and so I grew up around a lot of boxwoods and saw this often. No, you know, there's been a lot of research on it. Clemson's done a lot of research on the boxwood blight, and you know, their advice for if you see it coming, cut it out, remove the plant, remove all of the leaves. So typically you'll see a particular section of the plant turn brown and then it'll drop its leaves. You'll want to get those leaves out of there as soon as you can. Just get them out of the garden. Blow them out is probably the best way. If it's in and amongst other pine straw and mulch, just go ahead and get all that stuff out around that section within a 6 square foot section, 6 feet either way from that plant. Get it all out of there and replace I would dig out that particular bush and a lot of the soil around it, and backfill the hole with some fresh dirt and another boxwood, because if it's left untouched, it'll just keep going down the line. As far as what to spray on it, not much that I know of. And Clemson's done a lot of research on this, and they'll say the same thing. If you see it, you just got to remove the plant. And in some cases, if it's bad enough, you may need to go back with a different species of plant. So, go back with something else that'll solve the problem on the hedge for you there. Hopefully you don't get to that point where you have to replace the whole hedge, but that's reality on the boxwood blight. I'm sorry, I wish I had a better solution. Terry, spell that nursery. So you may be referring to Olschig's nursery. That's Olschig's is OELSCHIGS. And again, guys, if you've got a commercial company that you can open an account with, that would be a way to be able to get some of their product. They don't allow walk-ins. They don't, they just don't have customer walk-ins there. And if you call them, they'll say you need to be a supplier or a contractor. So, but again, the two nurseries that are local here, Taylor's, and then so sorry, cannot think of the other one down there on 46 now. Forgive me, but both of those have accounts with Olschig's and are getting plants from them regularly. And if you say, hey, I want to get this plant, Olschig's probably has it. Last question, is oleander not recommended to grow in your home? So if you talk about in your home as a house plant, I've never grown it as a house plant. I mean, the leaves are toxic to animals. I will say it would take that animal consuming a lot of it for it to be fatal. And I mean a large quantity of it. It would be really tough for that to happen. But the dog will go by and chew on a leaf. That's pretty common. So one or two leaves, it might upset his stomach a little bit. That's the reason why a lot of people are scared to grow oleander. But I really like the plant. It's really nice. I wouldn't grow it in my home. I would grow it around my home though. And I don't see that one as a patio plant either, really. I don't see it planted in containers. Most often it's planted, in the ground in the landscape. Outside, I heard the root system damage the soil for another plant. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase that question? Oh, for oleander. Okay. So you're talking about, will the root system from that plant damage other plants or prevent them from growing? Yeah, and the scientific term for that would be allelopathic. Allelopathic, a tree or a shrub that is allelopathic is one that contributes a poison or toxin into the soil to where other plants just have a difficult time growing around it. A lot of the cedar trees are this way. The black walnut trees are this way. You won't ever see much growing underneath any one of those trees. But oleander, I've not heard of that. I've not heard of that being the case.
I want to hop in for just a second here. We do also have some questions over in the chat as well. So we have from Julia Sharma. She says she's new to Palmetto Bluff. It seems that pine needles are the most used mulch here. How does that keep the water in and the weeds at bay?
Using pine needles instead of mulch? Yeah. So it's all about the base, right? You get a good base of material built up, and that's going to help suppress the weeds. On a brand new, like a newly constructed home, newly constructed landscape where the soil has just been turned over and disturbed, and then you put a fresh layer of pine straw down, depending on how thick the contractor put it down, that's going to help that's going to help prevent the weeds. But over time, you're going to see that the weed pressure gets less and less over time, generally speaking. Freshly disturbed soil is going to turn up a lot of weed seeds, and that combined with just a light layer of pine straw, you're probably going to get a lot of stuff popping through. But over time, you replenish the pine straw, maybe more falls down on top. that will always filter water through and allow water to get through there. But you'll have that pine straw start to decompose and form a nice layer, a matted layer across the soil that will help protect it, and almost like a weed barrier, but still allowing water to filtrate through there. Does that answer the question?
Let's see here. Yes, it does. She does have one other question as well. She asked if spring bulbs do well in this area, in particular tulips, daffodils, or crocus.
Yeah, great question. I love daffodils are my favorite there. And it's funny, like I grew up in central South Georgia, and daffodils grew wild all over the fields and pasture lands up and down the rural roadsides that I grew up. You would see them frequently come up in this time of year. I tell you, another one was the white. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the white blooming one. Another bulb, paper whites. Thank you. So those do really well. I've not seen them grow. It's strange because like I saw all that in Georgia, but over here on the coast, I've been here 15 years, and I haven't seen quite as much of that just growing naturally in the wild. And in the landscape, you can plant them, but expect to plant them and replant them every year. The daffodils, you might get a year or two out of them. Plant them in the fall, let them grow in the soil through the winter. Around January, February, they'll pop up and grow and bloom nicely for you. You might see that happen for a couple of years in a row, but I think it gets so, I don't know if it's so hot and humid here that the bulbs end up rotting in the ground after a couple of years. I know that is the case for tulips and crocus as well. Now you can get tulips and crocus to grow well as an annual flower, plant the bulbs in the fall, reap the beauty and the benefit in the spring, but don't expect too much out of it the next year. I'll tell you one way though that you could work around that is to dig those up. If you know where you planted them, dig them up after they've done their thing in the spring, and you can just keep them in some old stocking hose and in a refrigerator in the garage or something over the course of the summer, or just keep them in a dark, cool location and plant them again in the fall. That would probably be the way to go to try to get more than 1 year out of the tulips.
And what about dahlias?
Haven't had any experience growing dahlias in here, in the low country. My brother-in-law he's got a place up in North Carolina in the Cashers area, and he and his neighbor friends, they grow them all over the place up there. Just haven't seen them down here. I think it's pretty hot and humid for them down here.
And then we do have one more question back over in the Q&A from Chris Richardson. You see that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Do you recommend we put mulch on our planted beds at the communal Palmetto Bluff garden? Yeah, I do. That would, so it's going to help if you're able to stay involved enough to keep the weeds down. That's going to, if you're visiting once a week, you can probably keep up with the weeds because it's a pretty small area. And I know the irrigation is pretty regular there. So, the mulch benefits are going to keep the weeds down, and they're going to help preserve moisture around the soil. But because you're active enough in there to keep the weeds at bay, I would say you could get away without it. If you're going to do it, I think you've got probably enough interest, and you might even have a compost bin over there. I think there is one. I think that would be something to look into, maybe getting more volume of that, at least enough that all the members of the garden club could use that compost. Again, I'm talking about the leaves and cow manure, put them in there in the fall, chop the leaves up, layer them in there with cow manure and the leaves, and then keep turning it throughout the winter. And if you had enough volume of that, the garden club could produce everything they would need to mulch those beds. And, if you get the benefit of doing that versus the pine bark mulch or something, you're going to get some added value to that soil, right? Those composted leaves have a lot of minerals and nutrients. Anything that the tree had that it fell off of, those leaves are going to have in it, right? And then with the cow manure in there, you're going to get natural sources of nitrogen. So when you talk about a compost product that's been sitting there all winter, mulch those things in the spring after you plant, I think that would be a great way to go.
A note on that. So I know we have a huge box out there that is marked as for being for plant waste only. I don't know if we are actually cultivating it as compost. So I will reach out to the POA about that, as well as the landscaper we have out there, and see what I can find out. And if we are not, we can certainly look into beginning doing that. So that is a good note there. We do also have a note from Mrs. Singh in the Q&A, just kind of for everyone, I believe, that she has had good luck with day and Asian lilies here. And then if you missed it, Liz did post the name of the nursery on 46 over in the chat. That is Southern Marsh Nursery. Yes, thank you, Liz.
Yeah, okay. Well, good. Well, are those all the questions?
I am not seeing any more. Anyone last call for questions? No? All right,
And
well, ask
Liz,
go ahead.
Yeah. Liz, were you going to draw, are we going to draw the name live right here, or we want to announce it later?
Chris Richardson. Chris Richardson wins a prize.
There he is. Congratulations, Chris. All right, he's our winner for today. Chris, we will reach out to you on how we can get that to. I can drop it off on your doorstep. We're in Palmetto Bluff 5 days a week, so we'll get it to you somehow. All right.
All right. And actually, do you mind telling me, what does Chris Richardson win today?
Liz? I don't know if she can hear. So it's a
Yeti Lowball tumbler.
Prize bucket. Yeah, we've got a whole bucket put together. I mean, it's a Yeti Lowball tumbler, which is really nice for your cocktail or whatever you may enjoy in the evenings, even coffee in the morning. So that's the prize. And then there's some other materials in there as well in the whole gift bucket. So, but yeah, enjoy that, Chris. Congratulations.
All right. Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining us. It is always a pleasure. Again, to all attendees, if you think of any questions later that you did not get a chance to ask, it looks like actually I have a hand up. Missy Brewster, is there a way for you to pop your question through in the chat? I'm not sure if I can, I can't answer it that way. Unfortunately, we don't have it currently set up that way. I'm not seeing it. Well, Missy, if you have a question that we did not get to, please feel free to email that over to me. And oh, it was already answered. Perfect. But again, if anyone does have any questions later, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be more than happy to pass your questions along and get those answers for you. Thank you all again very much for attending today. This was an excellent turnout with wonderful participation. And thank you, Zach, for presenting for us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Nicole, and happy gardening to you all as we move towards spring.
Yes, and we will get the YouTube link sent out to everyone as well once we have it uploaded. It may take a day or two, but we'll get that all sent out. So thanks so much.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone.